So, welcome everyone. We'll get started. Welcome to our April safety update. And I know normally Gary leads these and he's not in the office today, so I'll be your host. And I have Dr. Stephen Webber here with me as well. So we do aim to keep these nice and short, but we have a few interesting and new topics in the lineup today. So we'll be talking about, is there too much psychological safety or too much emphasis on that in the workplace? Research that tells us that stress is good for your health, and some controversial views that it's also good for business. We answer a question: is it legal to park your car on the nature strip? The updating welding exposure standard. We pose the question, is there too much reliance on high visibility wear in the workplace? And a reminder that at the end of this month is World Day for Safety and Health at Work. Also, it's also marked as Workers' Memorial Day. So, question of the week. Is high visibility clothing legally required on construction sites? Feel free to put in your answer in the chat, and we'll come back with the answer for that at the end of the webinar. Now, the main article of the newsletter, so I trust you all got a copy of our newsletter in the email at the beginning of the month. If you didn't, I've put the link to the newsletter in the chat here, so you can click on that and download the full newsletter. But what we come along to the webinar for is a bit of an informal chat. And if you like to save the time reading, if you're not so much a fan of reading, we'll tell you what you missed. So this one about too much psychological safety is based on an article that was in the Weekend Australian in February, talking about research done at the University of Pennsylvania. And Professor Capelli reported that when businesses moved from poor to average psychological safety, it helps performance of the business. But when they moved from average to high focus, so, considered a lot of focus on the workers' psychological safety, they found performance declined. So what they're saying is performance declines when there's too much focus on psychological safety. So what does this psychological safety mean? Basically, they found out these results by, surveys with the workers, and said, if your team believes there's zero chance they'll be held accountable for making mistakes, they would rate psychological safety as very high. They feel very safe to, make mistakes and to be upfront about that, which, we certainly say that's fine if their job involves taking calculated risks. But for many jobs, we don't consider it's neither safe nor beneficial for business if people can, are not really held accountable for their behavior at work. So the professor explained the negative effects of excessive psychological safety gives the impression that I'm not responsible for my performance and I won't be criticized for poor performance. So that was just, I guess an interesting mindset. And what we were really talking about, the lead of our newsletter is really the importance of balancing psychological safety with the business needs at the same time.
Well, it's also that balance of risk and physical safety as well as psychological safety. So if you approach it in the wrong messaging, freedom from mistakes is generally good, but do ensure that you don't allow that to become risk-taking and freedom from normal safety processes and rules. So,
and, just general performance management.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And following on a similar topic to that, because as it was similar, I just wanted to share about an interesting research by psychologist Kelly McConville. And she has a really popular TED talk with over 32 million views. And what she talks about, and also in her book, is that research has discovered that high levels of stress increase the risk of death by as much as 43%. So they surveyed people, and then they studied, essentially, they surveyed them about their perceived levels of stress and then found out when they died. And so certainly if they felt stressed, they were significantly more likely to die sooner. But this was only the case in the people that believe stress was harmful. So they asked them about, how stressed they are and if they feel that it was harmful. Those who reported high stress levels but didn't believe it was harmful had the lowest risk of death of all participants. So I thought that was really fascinating, is that we can actually benefit from stress. It does have in nature, it has the benefit of, helping us to run away from danger and activating that nervous system. But also, physically, it is harmful to us if we believe it's harmful. And this is all just about the outlook, about having a positive outlook. So one study at Yale University showed that people who looked positively upon old age lived 7.6 years longer than those that had a negative view of old age. So if you avoid smoking and you exercise, you will gain 4 years of your life. 4 extra years compared to a smoker who doesn't exercise. Whereas just having a positive outlook will give you 7.6 years longer. So that certainly tells us why we should embrace stress. And there's more about it in the TED Talk. If you just look up in the TED Talks how to make stress your friend, you can learn more about how to actually use the stress for your benefit, and hopefully a healthier, longer, happy life. But I guess the key learning here for workplace is if your well-being programs tell workers that stress is harming them, it probably is. Whereas messages that promote positivity should have benefits to overall worker health. Yeah. And this is an interesting one. Sort of along the same line, but a bit more extreme. This author, there's a book, it's about 10 years old, how stress in the workplace and how to cause it. And the book teaches bosses how to intentionally induce stress to increase productivity of their workers, which is certainly an unconventional view. But the author, Howard Edwards, it's somewhat of a satirical approach to workplace management, focuses on intentionally causing stress and explains that stress has a vital role to play in a company's success. And it's his belief that too many businesses focus on employee contentment and team building. And he believes this approach makes the feel-good factor, makes the staff more placid and therefore less competitive. So certainly in some businesses, certainly sales type jobs and some jobs, a bit of competition and motivation is really important. So even though I thought this approach was a bit extreme, and it actually just seems funny because it's so outrageous, some of the suggestions in the book, by just doing things to rattle the worker, like just going and opening and shutting their door and just making them uncomfortable, telling well-performing workers that you're disappointed in their performance, really quite strange, but it's still an interesting, unconventional approach. But it does remind us, along with the first article, about the importance between balancing motivation and well-being for a productive and positive work environment. Next, is it legal to park your car on the nature strip? What do you think, Steve?
I've read the article, so that would be cheating.
Yeah, I personally would have just assumed that it was okay. Yeah, but apparently, according to the road rules, the Australian road rules adopted by the states, it is illegal to park on the nature strip. However, it's up to local councils to decide, how they will enforce the rules. But the laws, the road rules specifically says a driver must not stop on a bicycle path, footpath, shared path, or dividing strip or a nature strip adjacent to length of road in a built-up area. However, some states or councils have specific rules. So some West Australian councils permit parking on the nature strip as long as the motorist has permission from the property owner or occupant. E.g., you park in front of your own premises or someone else's with their permission, which seems fair because, I know if I used to live near a tram stop, and it seems a bit weird when someone parks directly in front of your house every day. You're thinking, well, that's not where you should park, but that was on the road. I guess it would be a bit more intrusive if they're parking on your nature strip. So there you go. Technically, it is illegal, so should be parking on the proper car spaces. Now, welding fumes. Safe Work Australia has recently amended the workplace exposure limit for airborne contaminants, and they've lowered the threshold standard for welding fume. So it was previously 5 milligrams per meter squared that was acceptable, and now the exposure needs to be below 1 milligram. So it's a significant reduction. And this is based on the increased evidence that welding fumes are not only harmful, but potentially carcinogenic and require tighter controls. And this is what's driven a lower exposure standard. So welding fumes have long been known to cause metal fume fever. However, increasingly, they continue to find a linkage or increasing the link to cancer of the lungs, kidney, larynx, stomach, and the nervous system damage. So welding fume exposure is certainly harmful in the short term, but it's also increasingly found to be harmful long term as well. So what should you do? Like all airborne contaminants, nothing is really good to inhale except for fresh, clean air. So, with your welding, it's looking at things like ventilation and respiratory, really good ventilated environments, extraction and respiratory protection where needed.
Andrea, just in relation to this, it's not just Safe Work Australia. Pretty much every jurisdiction has adopted this into their regulations over the last quarter. So this is legal enforcement across the entire country now. So it's not just a recommendation, it's within all the legislation for and OHS regulations. So
thanks for that, Steve. That's really good to know. So if your workplace has welding, you might want to look into making sure your ventilation is very good. Now, Gary wrote this article about, is there too much high visibility wear? And, the idea, the intention of high visibility clothing is to increase visibility of the particular workers working near traffic. And Gary thinks that some workplaces have so much high visibility workwear that it can be confusing, and it's almost like a find Wally. They're just lost amongst all the high vis. And potentially workplaces risk losing the impact of the high visibility clothing when it's overused or not necessary, as in it doesn't stand out so much anymore because everyone's wearing it. It's also really important to remember the hierarchy of control. The personal protective equipment is the last resort, according to all the regulations in Australia. So it is important to look for permanent solutions to traffic hazards, such as, complete separation of the humans from the traffic, and therefore eliminating the need for the personal protective equipment. But if you do, avoid the temptation to over-specify high visibility. There's a common practice sometimes to, if in doubt, add more PPE. And it can lose impact if there's too many distractions or high vis everywhere. It's also important to, if you do need to have the high visibility clothing, if it is required where you cannot separate humans and traffic, it's important to very clearly delineate those areas by having clear signage of where the PPE is required. And if people, for example, need to put a vest on before crossing over to a certain area, it's helpful to have that PPE readily available so that people don't forget. And I mentioned at the beginning, this month, the 28th of April, is World Day for Safety and Health at Work, and it's also Workers' Memorial Day. And on their website, Safe Work Australia's, explains that their latest data showed in 2022, 195 workers in Australia were fatally injured at work. So it's a stark reminder, that even though safety has, continues to improve, and, with a reduction in fatalities, it's still happening far too frequently. To ensure better safety for the future. Now, every year, the International Labour Organization has a theme for World Safety Day. And this year's theme is the impacts of climate change on occupational safety and health. Whilst it doesn't seem immediately obvious here in Australia, in parts of the world, it's understood that changing weather patterns have significant impact on work, affecting workers' safety. Some of the risks exacerbated by climate change can include excessive heat, UV radiation, so sunburn, air pollution, potentially major industrial accidents, extreme weather events, and an increase in vector-borne diseases and increased exposure to chemicals. So I'm not sure how all of those come together, but there is more information on the website, the International Labour Organization's website for World Day for Health and Safety at Work. Steve, what do you think about the impact of climate change on safety here in Australia?
Well, we've already seen significant number of events or activities where increased weather events, increased or changes in the weather have resulted in changing work patterns. So even down here in Victoria, where we're not got as extreme weather, the construction industry is dealing with far more disruptions of wet weather days, mud, etc., which is causing buildup of project work to the point and adjustments, slippage, additional traffic management rules around unsafe driving and work. So this changing pattern is causing even micro adjustments in the workplace, which we're going to have to adapt to and start to think about how we're going to fix or include in our normal processes.
Yeah, and potentially, I guess you could see work continuing to proceed even though the conditions aren't ideal, if they've had significant delays in a project.
Well, or adapting to how does a business operate or continue to operate when you are faced with multiple unsafe work days. And then we've seen significant changes in Queensland, etc., where secondary exposure just past the weather event of now we're getting unearthing and asbestos contamination in waterways and mudways within homes and houses. So extra dealing with more contaminated soil. So there's a lot of adaptations that we have to make to encounter, deal with the immediate danger, but then also the secondary effects that flow on from that.
Yeah, and in Victoria we had bushfire music events impacted by bushfires this year, and businesses and organizers always they have a decision to make about when do you draw the line and cancel an event for safety of the participants. So we might see that more frequently, that events cannot proceed potentially due to the weather.
Well, I think that from just a purely cost-based process, insurances are frequently looking at weather exposure and climate change event impacts. And if you can't get the insurance for your activity or event, what does that mean for you actually running it? So as just a business imperative, we're getting significant impacts through those kind of processes.
Yeah. So World Day for Safety and Health at Work, especially on the 28th of April, it's worth thinking about how climate change might have impacts on the safety in your own business and what you can do to better protect the workers and, of course, reduce the effects of climate change that caused by your operations. Okay, so just a reminder of our next safety leadership training course. This is a public course, which means anyone can come and attend the 2-day safety training, which we usually get really great feedback from that course. So if you're interested, get in touch to our inquiries email. And question of the week. I don't know, anyone didn't answer.
Yeah, we had three respondents, I believe.
Oh, is that right? What were the answers?
Three respondents all indicated no, it is not a legal requirement.
Oh, we have a smart and well-informed audience. So well done to everybody. It is indeed, it's commonly, a lot of people say to me that they thought safety boots, vest, and hard hats were all required, a requirement on construction sites, and we're very surprised to hear that in none of the states it's a specific requirement to have a safety vest, even though I don't think I've ever been to a construction site that permitted you to work without the vest. Which is, following on from what we were talking about is, is there too much high visibility? I often sometimes go to like a store fit out, so it's just, construction work being done inside. So, just drilling shelves together and the likes of that. There's no movement of mobile plant, but still enforce the safety vest. And it's just, we just get used to it because that's what we see all the time, but in fact, not actually not a requirement. So potentially a construction site could review their risk assessment to decide whether or not high visibility is necessary for that project.
And
What are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, yeah, so I've seen real life examples of where this becomes problematic. So if you think about lunchtime, when you get the lunchtime rush of individuals moving, if everyone is wearing high vis all the time, if you actually have active traffic management controls in place that you need to direct and get people's attention, they get drowned out. So metro trains, for example, experiences this quite a bit. So around 3:30, when all the construction workers come off site, they've got signalers that are trying to communicate to the trains, and the train drivers can't see them in the sea of high vis because they don't stand out anymore. So they're trying to. So it can create problems where it becomes a blur, and it's again that attention blindness that triggers in. If you see it all the time, you stop seeing it. So
yeah,
creating it as a point of use requirement or a hazard specific requirement only actually has benefits. So it's not something that you should be necessarily scared of. There's a lot that can be added or benefited from just reviewing how you use it and how excessively you use it.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Like Gary's article talked about, it's just, often it's just a case of if in doubt, add more PPE, but it's probably important to rethink that in some situations. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar. Feel free to post if you have any questions or comments. And we look forward to seeing you next time. I think it's on the 10th of May. We'll email you. And we look forward to seeing you on the webinar next time.